So who are the favourites to be going up next season? Let's talk about it. Guys, welcome back to another video on the channel. A couple of weeks ago we did this for the current relegation favourites in the Championship. Today I thought we'd look at some of the highest performing teams going into next season. Who do we think is going to be in and around the top 6? We're going to be looking into the bookmakers odds, some of the historical facts and figures about the newly relegated teams coming back down to the Championship and how many of them generally tend to bounce back at the first time of asking. If you guys had to call it right now, who do you sort of see as the strongest 6 sides in the Championship? Towards the end of the video we'll also be speaking about some potential dark horses for next season. Loads of stuff to go over in today's video, but if you do go on to enjoy, make sure to leave a like. If we get it 350, that would be massively appreciated. Also do stick around and subscribe for a bit of regular Championship content. But without any further ado, let's jump into this one. So before we do jump into anything, I think it's important to establish currently who are the favourites to be promoted next season, going off the bookmakers odds. Coming in probably quite unsurprisingly so as the top 3, it is all 3 of the newly relegated sides. So Fulham coming in as the favourites at the moment, closely followed by West Brom and then Sheffield United. Now we'll get round to speaking about those 3 clubs individually in a minute or two because there's quite a bit to unpack with all of them. We know a bit more about them now than we did a few weeks ago, where each of their sort of managerial situations was quite unclear. I think we're still going to see quite a few fluctuations in terms of people coming and leaving in terms of players, but generally, yeah, all 3 of them are looking quite strong going into next season. After those 3 we then have Bournemouth, obviously the only relegated side from last season who wasn't promoted at the first time of asking, with both Norwich and Watford going ahead and doing so. Then we have the 2 Welsh clubs in Cardiff and Swansea, followed by Barnsley, Middlesbrough, Nottingham Forest and Blackburn, currently making up the top 10. We'll get around to speaking about each of those. So the first thing that I thought we'd look into was some of the sort of historical facts and figures about how the newly relegated teams coming down from the Premier League generally tend to get on in the Championship in their first season back at this level. Now, these numbers to the side of me surprised me quite a bit actually. So this shows, did a newly relegated team go ahead and win the league? So a team going down from the Premier League, did they then go ahead and win the Championship the following season? It's only happened 3 times in the last 10 Championship seasons, which if you were to ask me sort of like off the top of my head, I would have said that number would have been much higher. Last season obviously it happened with Norwich, and the only 2 seasons prior to that in the last 10 seasons were Burnley, I think in 15-16, and Newcastle in 16-17. So maybe the stereotypical view that I've definitely held at times that, you know, the 3 teams coming down from the Premier League are like way better than everyone else in the league and stuff like that, and there's always one team who's just like too good and always goes up, you know, and blitzes the league. Generally that doesn't actually tend to happen. And then the next thing I thought I'd look into was how many of the newly relegated Premier League teams bounced back at the first time of asking, so not necessarily going on and winning the Championship, just to promote it, so either finish in the top 2 or go ahead and win the playoffs. Last season we had 2 of them, Norwich and Watford both bounced back at the first time of asking. We had the possibility of it being 3 with Bournemouth also finishing in the playoffs, but as they were beat by Brentford in the end, that didn't happen. And as you can tell, once again, these numbers were a little bit on the low side for what I had maybe come to expect them to be. We've only had 2 of the newly relegated sides bounce back at the first time of asking twice in the last 10 seasons. So it happened last season and it happened in the 15-16 season. And apart from that, generally we tend to get one of them promoted back up at the first time of asking, but as you can see, on 3 separate occasions we've had none of the newly relegated sides being promoted back up to the Premier League at the first time of asking. However, I do foresee a change in these numbers happening, certainly over I'd say the next sort of like 5 years or something like that. And I do think that the clubs in the Championship at the moment who don't have these parachute payments to be spending and things like that, especially as they've been impacted by the pandemic, I think we've already sort of seen the effect, the ripple effect on the transfer market so far, with a lot of Championship clubs going in for sort of free transfers or loan deals. We're not really seeing huge sums of money being spent, and I sort of think that those, you know, massive fees being spent by teams who don't have these parachute payments in the Championship, the likes of the Derby County splashing loads, you know, putting like 20 million down in the transfer window, or Sheffield Wednesday spending loads and things like that. I think those days are behind us, to be honest with you. The model now that teams are going to be looking towards that don't have those parachute payments are, you know, the way that Brentford have gone about things, the way that Barnsley have gone about things recently, a more sort of analytical way to look into recruitment, whereby you look to bring in these young developing players, flip them for a profit, and then reinvest that money back into the squad. I think that's the route that most teams are going to try and go down. Obviously, that's a lot easier said than done, but what it does mean is we could start to see a bit of a disparity between those three clubs coming down from the Premier League and the rest of the Championship trying to sort of punch up and compete with them. That gap could get bigger. And we'll go back to looking at those favourites now, because if two of those three aren't going to be finishing in the top two next season, then who realistically could be a bit of an outside challenger to go ahead and be, you know, up there for automatic promotion next season? Well, Bournemouth are a really interesting side at the moment with the recent appointment of Scott Parker. That'll make games between Bournemouth and Fulham fascinating going into next season. He's coming into what is already a really talented group of players that probably underachieved last season. I know they made the top six, but that squad should have been challenging for automatic. Obviously got them over the line in the end to finish in the top six, but with what they had available to them, I think that Bournemouth fans coming into this season were expecting something a little bit better. Now, Bournemouth are a club who could still go through several changes between now and the start of the season in terms of key players leaving. You know, Danjuma's constantly getting links away. Billing is getting links away at the moment as well. It's very up in the air sort of what's going to be happening to their star players. But we've already seen the introduction of Marcondes into that squad. Parker is a manager, you know, love him or hate him, who does already have a Championship promotion on his CV, which makes Bournemouth quite an interesting package going into next season. Each of the Welsh clubs I also think are worth discussing in this conversation. Swansea, because of their track record under Steve Cooper. Steve Cooper's future just a week ago really was really up in the air with Swansea, with sort of every managerial vacancy linking Steve Cooper to that job, but now with those vacancies sort of being filled both in the Premier League and in the Championship, he looks more settled now, and Swansea have already gone about starting their business heading into next season. The big departure from there is obviously Andre Ayew, and to sort of replicate his importance to that team is always going to be tough. But with the way that Swansea like to play the loan market, you know, we already saw them being linked the other day to Harry Wilson. It might not be the most entertaining football in the world, Cooper Bowl, but you expect Swansea to be up there once again, don't you? And I think the same can be said about Cardiff as well. It was a bit of an underachievement, certainly the first half of last season. You know, it was a squad that was capable of rubbing their shoulders in and around that top six. Neil Harris didn't quite get the formula right in the first half of the season, but under Mick McCarthy so far, Cardiff have had, you know, top six form. It was just that start to the season which really held them back. So giving Mick a full season, you know, maybe giving some more reinforcements into that squad again, and Cardiff will be another one of those sides who grind out the results going into next season. So yeah, definitely Cardiff and Swansea are two to watch out for. Barnsley going into next season is a bit of a tough one to call at the moment, just because there's been so much change at the club already, you know, with Ishmael departing, Marcus Schock coming in as their new manager. I like the sort of basis that they've got about that recruitment. Fairly quickly getting him in, and his profile seems to fit the club with his track record of developing youngsters. Obviously, we've already seen a couple of big departures as well, with Alex Mowat moving on. Daryl DK is not going to be there next season. I expect Barnsley will still be mixing around, you know, upper mid-table, but whether they will be able to go and make it into the top six again, I think it's going to be a tough one. Middlesbrough are interesting as well. Under Neil Warnock, you'd never quite rule them out, would you? And they have had a steady improvement, you know, last season to the one prior to that. It's another club, Borough, at the moment though, where I probably need to see their squad heading into next season. There's still quite a few moving plates going on around there. You know, we've had a few departures that we've seen from Borough already. At Nottingham Forest next season, there's definitely going to be loftier expectations on Chris Hughton. Chris Hughton, another manager in the Championship though, who does have a couple of promotions on his CV. Nottingham Forest generally in the summer transfer window is like an absolute revolving door. Like, over these last like 3 or 4 transfer windows, Nottingham Forest have gone absolutely crazy with bringing players in, letting people go, and there's never really been a settled sort of squad there. I think if they do sort of the right focused recruitment this time round, where it's not, you know, like 10 players coming in or something stupid like that, then we'll see, because last season was definitely an underperformance from Forest. And then the last team that was on that top 10 list for the bookies' favourites for promotion was actually Blackburn Rovers. Now, pound for pound, in terms of the talent that Blackburn have in their squad, I can see why they would potentially be talked about as potentially, you know, sneaking into that top 6, but under Tony Mowbray, I just don't see it happening, to be completely honest with you. I thought that after last season, they may have seen that as the last chance to sort of cut ties really and move on and look to go in a different direction. We'll wait and see what sort of happens with Adam Armstrong and, you know, whether he does depart and they look to reinvest that money back into the squad. But under Mowbray, I just don't see Blackburn finishing in the top 6. So let's talk about the favourites first of all. That's Fulham. Obviously, they've recently appointed Marco Silva, and I've seen a couple of sort of mixed reactions on that one, but I think it's a pretty positive appointment, to be honest with you. I think he works well with attacking players, and that's what Fulham have in their squad. But I do still anticipate there to be a few big departures from Fulham. We're still hearing some sort of murmurs at the moment about Mitrovic potentially still wanting out of the club. Obviously, things didn't unfold the way he would have wanted last season, as he was sort of cast aside by Parker. Tom Cairney's also been linked with a move away to Sheffield United at the moment, so if those two depart, that's two pretty big players who have had sort of like key roles to play in the last couple of promotions. Quite a bit does still need to be done at Fulham, but with the sort of pull they have in the Championship, I wouldn't be surprised if they do bring in a couple of gems. West Brom under Valérien Ismaël I think will be very strong going into next season. They've still got a couple things to iron out, obviously what's going to happen with Pereira's future. Should he stick around? For me, that's almost like West Brom like nailed on for promotion or something like that. Having a player like that can make absolutely all the difference. It would be the equivalent of, you know, last season Norwich keeping hold of Buendia. Sam Johnson as well also looks more than likely that he's going to depart, but they're still left with what is a top Championship squad. You know, if we imagine their sort of front three going into next season is Callum Robinson, Grady Diangana and Colin Grant. I know things haven't quite clicked for Colin Grant at West Brom, but in the Championship he's already proven himself to be a guaranteed goal scorer from his time at Huddersfield, so those three would score goals for days, wouldn't they? I think it'll be interesting to see over this season how adaptable Ismaël actually is to this group of players, but yeah, I'm quite excited to see West Brom. I think they'll be very strong. And then for Sheffield United, more than anything for Jokanovic, it's about turning around a losing mentality, and that can be something that's quite tough to brush off after a relegation, and I do feel like Sheffield United may have that a little bit more so than the other two clubs because of how last season in the Premier League unfolded for them. Because if we sort of disregard the baggage of relegation and what that can do to a player sort of mentally going into the next season, there's a lot of talent in that squad on paper. For the Championship especially, people who didn't quite get their chance to do it in the Premier League. You know, I'm looking at someone like a Ryan Brewster who was unbelievable at Swansea, but it's not happened for him at Sheffield United yet. A little bit more creativity could be needed from midfield, so I'm very interested to see what the plan is for Luke Freeman, whether he is sort of brought back within the squad to make a difference next season and they do give him a chance, or they're just looking to offload him. Obviously his loan spell at Forest last season didn't really go to plan, but he's shown from his time at QPR he can be one of the best sort of creative outlets in the league. So yeah, at the moment I do sort of agree, my feelings do align with the bookmakers that these three probably are the strongest in the Championship going into next season at this current point. But I thought we'd finish off the video now by going over some of the potential dark horses for the top 6 heading into next season. So I picked out 5 teams here who are currently on in the top 10 of the odds to be promoted next season, and these were the 5 teams that I picked out: QPR, Reading, Millwall, Luton and Stoke. Now Reading, I was quite surprised that they weren't originally in the top 10 favourites to be promoted at this stage, given they finished 7th last year. As of recording, it's looking like Michael Elise is going to be leaving and on his way to Crystal Palace. Can you imagine him and Eze in the same team? My god, that would be unbelievable. But regardless of that, it's still a very talented squad who more than anything will be hurting from last season. After spending the majority of that season inside the top 6, they know the level they need to be at next season and they can't let those sort of standards slip as the year goes on. Now good momentum within football clubs can make absolutely the world of difference, and 2 teams who seemingly have that at the moment are Luton and QPR. Luton massively built on the platform they built for themselves in the previous season when they stayed up in the Championship. They've really gone on to solidify themselves as a comfortable mid-table side. I think that Nathan Jones has showed a certain degree of tactical nous, to the point now where you know when you're going into a game with Luton that it's going to be a really tough game of football. You know, at times in their first season, especially in the first half of that season when they were really struggling, everyone sort of saw Luton as like an easy 3 points and things like that. That couldn't be further from the truth at the moment, and with the way they've sort of redeveloped their squad already this summer, they'll be one to watch out for. QPR I also say the same about, because they finished last season on an absolutely wonderful run. It seems like Mark Warburton has got the balance spot on within that squad now. That seemed to be a bit of a problem for him before that, but they've already done a bit of work in the transfer window up until this point as well. If they carry on building on this team, QPR may not be all too far away from next season. I put Millwall in there also because from Millwall, you know you're going to get guaranteed clean sheets. They're always strong defensively. They've already added to that defence as well with Daniel Ballard coming on loan from Arsenal. If they have a striker who can make the difference for the next season, potentially that could be Benik Afobe, then Millwall won't be all too far away either. And then the last team I threw in there was Stoke, where it does feel like there is a bit of a refresh of the squad going on at the moment. Last season, in fact, certainly in the opening few months, they were mixing it in and about the top 6. And obviously we all know the story. Campbell picked up that injury and they absolutely fell off a cliff. But there is young talent in that Stoke squad at the moment, and added, you know, a bit of Arancic magic here and there, and a couple of other players who they may look to invest into. And you never know with Stoke, because they have sort of been the underachievers of the Championship over these last few years, and it's about time that they really stake a claim for the top 6. But guys, there we have it. That will wrap it up for today's video. If you did go on to enjoy, make sure to leave a like. Get your thoughts in the comments down below. At this point in time, who do you see as potential dark horses going into next season, and who do you see as your favourites for promotion? If you did go on to enjoy though, make sure to leave a like and do stick around and subscribe for a bit of regular Championship content. Apart from that, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.